It's Wednesday, so it must be Talking Drupal time. This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development by this group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We're recording this on a Thursday, actually, in a Google Hangout. It's usually a Wednesday, but you can visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 90. It's Thursday, March 19th, and we're going to talk about map rendering. Welcome, guys.
Good morning.
It's Thursday, it's Wednesday, it's very confusing.
It's a day of the week.
It's a day of the week. We have to be flexible in our schedule sometimes. So here we are Thursday morning. Not an afternoon broadcast. So how are you doing today? We have John Picozzi from Oomph. Welcome.
Welcome to you, Steve. I am doing great, thanks. It's a bright, sunny Thursday here in Rhode Island.
It is. I've had some really fantastic weather, but 2 to 4 inches tonight. So It's not gonna.
No. Tomorrow night.
Oh, it's tomorrow night. I thought it was Friday snow.
Friday developing in the afternoon, and then overnight, Friday to Saturday, I believe.
All right, cool. Looking forward to it.
Also, PSA for all you Drupal fans out there: early bird pricing on DrupalCon tickets is over in 8 days. So, if you're going to DrupalCon and you want to get your tickets cheap,
what's the early bird price, John?
That's a great question. So it's over March 27th. Early bird pricing ends, and early bird pricing would be $450 for a DrupalCon ticket. An additional $200 if you want to go to the business summit. Same for higher ed summits. And hey, if you're a student, $225 is your price there.
Great.
So
are you going?
The jury's still out on that.
Okay.
I will clearly be making a decision in the next 8 days. Although in May, LA is way warmer than Rhode Island. So.
Right. Okay. So we also have sorry, I'm choking here. Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design.
Good morning. Looking forward to today's topic. Spent a fair amount of time over the last couple of weeks evaluating a couple of different map rendering systems, and I'd like to think that I know a little bit more about it than when I started out, so be happy to share. I'm definitely not looking forward to the snow. Boston broke their record for the snowy season last week. Not sure if Worcester quite has gotten over yet, so we'll see what happens. But we're around 110 inches this year, so kind of sick of it.
So is that the reason why you grew some new facial hair? We see that you're sporting a mustache and goatee today.
No, the reasoning behind that is my wife made a comment and said she'd like to see what it looks like. I think it came out pretty nice.
Yeah, it looks good.
So.
I'll reserve judgment for an in-person encounter.
All right, so let's jump into our topic today, map rendering. What we're talking about here is putting a map on your website with location data on it.
Exactly. So very briefly, we should sketch out there's a couple of different pieces. Many people consider mapping as one cohesive bunch, but there's actually at least 3 different layers to putting a map on your website. And we'll talk mostly about the final one, but the first piece is you need to collect the location information. The second piece is you need to convert that location information from an address to a longitude and a latitude. And then the final piece is actually rendering that map, getting a map and putting pins on the map where the locations are with some information. So today we'll be speaking about the rendering mostly.
So what is the circumstances that people would, what is the usability of maps, and when do you guys find that a map on a website is useful to have?
There's a bunch of different reasons. One of the most common reasons for that would be store locations. So if you have a store locator, having a map that can show where, either show something within 50 miles or show where somebody is if you're looking to travel to a city. That's a really common, one of the most common areas. I also happen to find my clients like a map on the contact page that just shows their location so that somebody can very easily click the directions button and get directions from wherever they are to their location.
Yeah, so it's often really helpful when you're trying to see multiple locations in relationship to each other is when it comes in handy. John, you've done some map work recently, haven't you?
Yeah, I actually just
seem
finished.
to remember corresponding with you in the last few months about something, right?
Yeah, I was actually working with Google Map Locator, or Google Store Locator, actually, which is a module for Drupal using the Maps API and the Google Store Locator API. And that's essentially what what it was for. It was for a client of ours that have multiple locations across the world and wanted to be able to allow their users to kind of look up based on the user's location, where the closest location of was for them. So works really well. Once you get it figured out, figure out how to cache it, and so it's quick. But once you get the caching down, works really well, and it works very similarly to Google Maps when looking up addresses and whatnot. So that's very useful as well.
So how do we store the data? So let's talk about storing the data. Is really the first step here that Nick mentioned. Is you need to maps need latitudes and longitudes. Just in general, that's how they work. So you need a way to capture an address and then store the latitude and longitude, and Drupal can do a lot of that for you, or all of that for you, if you use the right pieces.
Yeah, so the two most common ways to collect the initial location information with addresses is either location or address field. Those are the two biggest modules that most people are familiar with, and it's just a field that takes the street address, the country, the state, or the province, and zip code. They're actually both very well suited for international locations as well. I don't recall how address field works, but I know location, you choose the country first, and then it changes the form to match whatever that country's addresses look like. And if you've never been out of the country, addresses are very, very different in different countries. So it's not good to just have an address field, a state field, and a country field, and let it work it out. So those are the two most common ways. There's also a GeoField and a Geocode module, which kind of help bridge the gap between having the actual location information and the next step in the process. The next step in the process is actually getting the latitude and longitude. The two most common ways to get latitude and longitude from an address are with the geolocation services Open Layers or Google, and they both provide, they'll take an input of an address and send back the latitude and longitude.
And these are configurations of the previous method you've already mentioned. So like if you install the location module, you then in your configuration pick the service you want to use to grab the geolocation data.
Exactly, and by no means are we mentioning all of them. There's many.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because by default it also I think has Yahoo Yahoo in there as an option for you.
Yeah.
Not Yahoo.
And I think there's a Russian one as well.
Right.
That's pretty big. So yeah, there's several out there, but we're just talking about a couple that are more common. And then once you get that information, you have to display it on a map. That's where today's discussion is going to focus.
So I want to touch on something before we get to the map here about grabbing the geolocation, and we talked about this back in an earlier episode. It was about a year ago. I'm not sure if anyone has that episode number handy. Maybe someone could look it up quick. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more about location services and just dealing with latitudes and longitudes in Drupal, we talked I think a whole show about that, maybe last February. And it's important to understand that in many circumstances, this information isn't necessarily free for you. I mean, Google, if you're using Google, which is very common to use, the module will go out and do the translation of the address to a latitude and longitude for you, but there are limitations on how many you can do in one day, in 1 hour, on a monthly basis from Google. So
it's actually interesting you say that, Steve, because one of the problems we had with the Google Store Locator, and I think this is the conversation that we had. We were importing, 600 locations, and we're using, the feeds importer, and a lot of the locations wouldn't get geolocated because we were hitting the limit for, how many requests you can send to Google within a minute, in that time frame, and you can find all that stuff on the API website. But it ended up we had to relocate quite a few of them because the API was basically saying no, you can't send any more information for the next 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it was.
Doesn't it just queue run cron?
It can do that, but we were doing it at import.
Oh, okay.
And it's actually not on cron. It's when you save the node. So when you save the node, it goes out to get that geolocation and saves it in your database for you, so it doesn't have to do it again.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so that brings back the memory of why we were talking about this a few months ago. So, John, what did you end up doing? Just throttling the input? Is that what you ended up doing?
No, we ended up dropping them all in there and then building a view to show us which ones weren't geolocated and just going in and resaving them.
Okay, gotcha.
So it was more of a manual process, but it only ended up in the end being like at most 100 nodes that we had to touch, and we wanted to verify the address information anyway, so we just went in and resaved them.
And to your point, Stephen, the episode that you were mentioning is episode 30, so there'll be a link in the show notes.
Great, thanks. Well, 30, that sounds like a long time ago, because we're at 90, right?
Yeah,
that was longer than a year ago.
Just over a year ago.
Yeah. Okay, so just some things to think about. So if you're building, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, if you're building a website that's based on geo stuff, you need to be very sensitive to those limits. If you're building a website that the geo is like a small function of the website, like maybe a store locator, you probably will never even run into these scenarios unless you're doing something like John did, which was importing, bulks of data.
Yeah, because I think the free limits for Google are something like 10,000 a month, 10,000 hits a month.
Yeah,
and
it's
not hitting. It's not going to hit the Google API every single time somebody loads the map. It's really just hitting the API each time you add a new address or change an address, and it stores it once. Now, if you're taking the user's location, then you can also hit the API there, but it's not too common that you do that. So depending on how you're doing the filtering, you may get 1 or 2 hits per search, but that's a long way from hitting 10,000 API hits a month.
Yeah, it's a good point. So when these modules do the translation of the address to the latitude and longitude is stored in Drupal at that point, so there's no reason to go back to the API again unless you tell it to. I know in the location module, you have the ability. I think in the latest version, there's a button when you look at it that will say go get the latitude and longitude again, like go after it again to update it. I think that's in their most recent release. So once that happens and it's really the creation of the node, then you're pretty much done. The map has all the data it needs at that point, and you're not really going back to a service to get those IP that latitude and longitude again.
Yep.
Good point. So let's move on. to the maps themselves?
So the two most common ones right now are Google and Leaflet. Leaflet's quite a bit newer. Has most of the same features as Google, but there's a slightly different feature set. And then there's another module that I found that was incredibly helpful in providing more ease of customization called IP Geolocation. So Google and Leaflet's mapping modules both come with views integration, but IP geolocation allows you to put a level on top of that and gives you some additional features that both Leaflet and Google support, but the Drupal modules themselves don't. So it's like an added layer in between that just allows you to more fully utilize both of those renderers.
So you could install a module that's specific for Google Map rendering. You could install a module that's specific for Leaflet, or you can install this third one that you've just mentioned.
Yep.
That would be the interface for both and give you additional features.
Exactly.
So that's the recommendation, is the place to start.
Yeah. The third one, IP geolocation, does require whichever one you're using. So if you're using Leaflet, you need Leaflet as well as IP geolocation. It's not a standalone.
Okay.
But it's incredibly useful. So maybe we should talk briefly about what you get out of the box with both of them, and how you get that data to the map. So typically you're using a view. I believe both Leaflet and Google do also have field level renderers, although you're usually using something like GeoField. If you use GeoField, if you're just trying to show one single location on a node, GeoField allows you to use the Google Map renderer to show that single location. So if you're in one of the cases I had mentioned, you have a customer that has one location, they want to be able to have that map on the contact page. GeoField is ideal for that. It allows you to create an extra field, it pulls it from the location, and it will display the map on their contact page. And you manage that just through the Manage Display interface. It's pretty, very simple, easy to get. With when you get to a point where you're displaying more than one location, you need to have a view that builds the list of items that you want to show, and then all three of these modules provide a different, not display, a different renderer. What's the word?
The view display? So it's
it's not the display. It's the formatter.
Like when you have, I want to display fields, or I want to display a node, you now have one that is, I want to display the map.
No, it's like if you want table or semantic fields or HTML lists, you now have a map.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, and you choose that option, and when you're on, then you have to tell it which field it's getting the location information from. And I know that all three of them are slightly different, but I found the easiest way is to use Geocode and GeoField here as the location, because it kind of simplifies the interface. All three of them use that, so you just have that one, and you can test across all three.
So we didn't mention that up earlier when we were talking about the location fields. So you said location or address field, but there's another, like the location module and address field module, but now you just mentioned the geolocation module?
The Geocode. So Geocode helps store the information once it's gone out to Google and grabbed the information. It stores it for address fields and for location fields as well.
So it's creating another field in your content type that's linking to those two other fields that you already had, or one of those fields. So if you're using location, it's linking to that and formatting it in a different way.
Yeah, and we're actually using the GeoField module for that. So you can actually point it. It can be a hidden field. You point it at a particular field that you want to grab the geolocation information from, and then it grabs that and grabs the IP longitude and latitude.
So Nick, I feel like we've just made this very complicated, and it's not, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. So to start at the beginning and go through it once very quickly, you have a location field that has information. You have a GeoField field that grabs the location information and converts it to longitude and latitude, and then you use that information on the view to display the location.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question here. So the location field by itself, without the GeoField, already grabs the latitude and longitude.
Yes, and you can use that for Google Maps, but it doesn't seem like an option for the latter. For
gotcha. So you're adding the second GeoField as a way to interface with the mapping modules better.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. And it's not a field that anyone's entering or anything. It's just a field that's there. It's dependent on other things in the node.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you. All right.
Yep. And it can. I think you can set it up so you enter stuff directly, but in most use cases, it's just an automatic hidden field that's pulling, and it's the format section of the view that you use to set the leaflet versus the others. When I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about Leaflet today because I've recently become very impressed with how it works. But with Google, we'll talk about Google first briefly. Google gives you the ability to determine what shows up on when you click on the Google pin. You can set what shows up in the pop-up, and that's about it. I mean, you don't have too much more control over the Google map at that point. I mean, Google does provide a lot of ways to manipulate the map, but the Google Maps view module doesn't give you too much more control that I've found. Leaflet, out of the box, gives you the ability to customize what the hover text, as well as the pop-up, and the size of the map. So you can tweak how big the map is displaying pretty easily. IP geolocation extends both of those greatly. So I think we should spend more time talking about IP geolocation's options.
So just so we're clear here, is that Leaflet and Google Maps are third-party systems, right? They're third-party tools that we're using.
Yes.
To display a map, and these modules are interfacing with those third-party tools, and some of them are doing better jobs at it than others in terms of giving you the flexibility to customize. And it sounds like from your experience over the past month that IP geolocation is a module that's giving you the most flexibility to do the most of the customizations that you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, I've been working with Drupal for a very long time. I have to say IP geolocation really impressed me, both with the level of detail and documentation and with the amount that it extends the modules and the flexibility that it provides. It's a very well documented module, and it gives you 2 or 3 times the options as the base modules themselves.
Right.
So, so to give you an example with the Google Map and IP geolocation, you can now control the colors of the pins or the versions of the pins. So you can set up pin switching. So if you have, for example, stores in many different time zones, and you want to be able to say, if somebody's looking at the world map, they want to be able to see stores that are currently open. You can have one store that's blue, which means open, and one store that's red, and that means it's currently closed. Or if you want to be able to change it so that a store that contains a particular product is this and a different product is that, for a dealership, for example, if you want a Chevy dealership to show a Chevy logo and a GMC dealership to show a GMC logo, that's not possible. And it's always been possible through the Google API, but the Google module itself doesn't provide that. With Leaflet, it gives you...
So you can build intelligence into how you're displaying the map at the pin level to provide the user with visual feedback of things that they might not generally have. So if you think of it generally a store locator, you're kind of seeing pins on a map and you maybe click on them and get an address. What you're saying here is that you can very easily with this module change those pins based on data that's in your database pretty easily.
Yeah, and it took, looking back, I say it was pretty easily compared to writing it yourself. It took a fair amount of tweaking to get it just right. I mean, there's just enough options, so many options that you end up tweaking stuff and looking at it, tweaking it again. So you spend a fair amount of time, but it's
that was probably more related to your experience with it, right?
Yeah.
The level of the learning curve.
Yeah, it was more learning curve, and the fact that I was trying to do pin switching based on time data, and doing comparisons with times and views is not fun.
Fun. Yeah, no, let's call it fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
When you're dealing with time zones too, yeah. It's a lot of fun.
So,
okay.
So I mean, I could see a situation where you could change the color of the pin based on product. So if somebody does a search for a product, you have a red store if the product isn't in stock there, and you have a green store if it is in stock.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's the possibilities are pretty endless in this case. It's pretty fantastic.
It's the, like, in my mind, it's the thing that takes a map to being somewhat useful to being extremely useful.
Yeah.
Right, when you can provide that kind of visual feedback for someone to make it clear to them as, hey, this pin is the one you're probably more interested in than this one, and do that just by coloring or a graphic there.
Yeah, and it's fairly straightforward to put together. The Leaflet integration gives you gives you the same thing. You can do pin switching pretty much out of the box with IP geolocation. You can also now customize the hover text. You can customize the pop-up, the size of the map, but with just one added module in JavaScript library called Leaflet Marker Cluster, probably one of the coolest things happens. You can now have the map intelligently cluster locations based on zoom level and proximity. What that means is if you have 3 stores that are very close to each other and you're zoomed way out, by default all 3 pins will just be on top of each other, and there's no way to know that there's 3 pins there.
Which is what it does in the Google map.
Yeah, which is what happens in Google Map, and there's nothing you can do about it in the Google Map. I mean, unless you write an interface with the API manually.
Right.
With Leaflet Marker Cluster,
that's not technically true, but I'll let you finish.
Okay.
It's not true how?
Using the Google Store Locator, there is actually a module, a marker cluster functionality that you can enable, so that there is functionality out of the box in certain module sets to do that.
Right. So it's probably very similar and that was the point I was trying to make a few minutes ago, that we're interfacing with third-party systems that probably do everything in the world. It's just what module are you using that gives you the capability that you want. Okay. So it was, John, you mentioned Geo Store Locator, right? I've got that in the show notes here for a reference link.
Google Store Locator.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe it provides that as well. But what Leaflet Marker Cluster does is it will take those 3 pins, depending on how close they are, and you can configure this, and it will break them, and it will combine them into a single cluster and say how many items are there, 3, 5, 10, whatever. And it's also very, very smooth. You click on it, it zooms in, breaks them out into separate pins, so you can see how they are, and it's dynamic. And you are able to control how close they are. So you can say, I want them to cluster if they're within 20 pixels, or if they're within 100 pixels, or if they're within 1,000 pixels, and that really depends on the size of of the pin. And then you can also set things. You can set values on the pin. So going back to the stock example, you could set up a store location, and it would be red if there's no stock, and it would be, you could set it to be blue if there is stock, but you can also say how many are in stock. So you can say, like, you search for a Coke, certain kind of Coke, it will say there's 35 at this store, 10 at that store, 5 at that store, and you can configure how big or the color of the pin based on those values as well. So it's extremely flexible.
So I want to give our listeners a visual description of what the clustering does. So if you picture that you have a map with, you have one store located in San Diego and you have 5 stores located in Boston, the default view of that would be like showing the entire United States. So the clustering gives you the ability to show a single pin in San Diego and then a cluster pin in Boston that has the number 10 on it, or whatever number I said, 5 stores. Yeah. So then when you click on the 5, it then explodes automatically into the zoom that fits all of those 5 in to display on your map, so you can then zoom in on them, as opposed to seeing 10 or 5 little pins sitting in Boston. You can't really tell how many are there.
Yeah, and it's dynamic, so as you zoom in and zoom out, if pins touch each other, they combine, and if you zoom in, they break out automatically. It's very, very smooth. The other thing I found, one of the reasons why I really like Leaflet, because Google's great, but one of the things I really like about Leaflet is it feels far more responsive. It feels far more like you start zooming and it zooms immediately. Google, I sometimes feel like there's a bit of a delay, and it works really, really well on mobile devices. I found, so I'm very much a fan of Leaflet going forward. So pinch and zoom seems to work, and I mean, there's just a lot of UI niceties that Leaflet seems to have that Google doesn't. For example, if you click on a pin and click outside the pin, Google, the pop-up stays there. On Leaflet, it goes away.
So Leaflet, I'm looking at their website right now. I think it's their website. Is it leafletjs.com? Or is that the? So they describe themselves as an open source JavaScript library for mobile-friendly interactive maps. So I think I like Leaflet too, from my experience with it over the past couple months. I don't think visually, from a high level, it's better than Google. I actually like Google's presentation, zoomed out a bit, better than Leaflet. But once you start to zoom in too, I do think Leaflet is superior, in visually, and they are focused on JavaScript for mobile. So, Nick, have you had a site that's using Leaflet in production? Like, you have experience, like, I know a few of the projects we've worked on with mapping, not live, but there is one that is live, or I'm wondering about the so everyone, the reason I'm asking this, anyone would say I'm totally comfortable with Google as my map because I know who they are, I know it's stable, I know they're not going anywhere. Leaflet, to many of the people listening to this right now, is probably something they've never heard of before.
Yeah, so Leaflet's been around for quite a while.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, I don't think it's going anywhere. I do have a couple of sites that are using it that I can't talk about.
That's a great endorsement. You don't think it's going anywhere.
Well, no, but I can't talk about it for the agreement that I have with the customers. But it's a renderer. It's not the service that's grabbing the geolocation information.
Mm-hmm.
So even if Leaflet goes away, your service isn't going to stop working.
Yes.
Or actually,
No. So no.
Yeah,
But
no, no.
that's the point. That's the point actually here is that Leaflet in our description today is rendering the map, and the approach that we're taking is if Leaflet doesn't work for you at some point, you can swap it out and go back to
Yeah,
Google.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
And
but
which is what that module would help you with, by the way. The module that is working the same interface to both Google and Leaflet. If you're using the IP geolocation module for this rendering, you could then be pretty easily swapping between the maps if you needed to.
yeah, all you would need to do is create a new display, change the format to the Google one, and and set the settings there, and you'd be all set. One caveat though is I found in order to add new pins, you just have to add it to, there's a markers folder in IP geolocation.
Yeah.
The Google map uses the markers folder. The Leaflet map uses a markers folder. And there's a bug involved.
So when you say A markers, you mean the name A markers?
Yes, it's one word.
Yeah.
And there's a bug in that if you have both enabled, which I experienced because I was trying to evaluate which one to use. If you have both enabled, both maps use the A markers folder. So it's a bit counterintuitive, but there's an issue in the issue queue on Drupal.org that explains it, and that's really the only thing I found counterintuitive about the whole project.
Are you aware of any high-profile websites that are using Leaflet for maps? I'm just wondering if you know.
No, not off the top of my head.
All right. Wasn't sure if you did. I was trying to do a quick Google search here too to see if I could find that.
I know it was developed by a company that does in-car navigation, I think.
Okay.
And they open sourced it, so they provide the maps on navigation in the cars, and I think that's where it started. So it's a fairly large company behind it. But as far as sites using it, I don't know if they have examples.
Hey, John, I'm curious. Before today, have you ever heard of Leaflet?
I have heard Nick mention it.
That doesn't count.
Yeah, no. Other than that, no. I had heard of OpenLayer, or Open Layers, I should say, which is more of a geolocation service. But no, I've never heard of Leaflet before today. You know, my biggest question here, it really is like, what's the point? What's the reasoning behind using behind not using Google? I mean, so what does Google have going for it? It integrates with Drupal. It's widely available. It's probably the number one, map rendering service on the internet right now. I think a couple of weeks ago you said, "Oh, hey, Leaflet's down." Like, I don't think I've ever had that issue with Google, the Google Maps API. I just wonder, what's the biggest or the really high level benefits to using Leaflet?
So there's a couple. First, I'd like to address the Leaflet being down thing. That Leaflet wasn't actually down. It was just a bad link on the module page. Leaflet wasn't actually down. So the big benefit, I see there's a couple. One is usability. It just, going back and forth between the two of them, I found Leaflet was far more intuitive and responsive than Google. It just felt faster, looked smoother. I somewhat agree with Steven. There's a certain zoom level that, the zoom level where you get the route numbers and stuff doesn't quite look as good on Leaflet as Google Maps, but other than that, I think it looks much nicer. Other than that, I'd say the biggest reason is it's open source. I mean, you can see under the hood. It's available. You're not relying on a corporation.
But I mean, let's be honest here. Google Maps has an API associated with it that you can freely use and leverage to your heart's content. I mean, as a developer, do you really need to be like, boots on the ground as to how the geolocation is returning the data that it's returning, as long as it's accurate and you can work with it?
Well, Leaflet's not dealing with grabbing the data or the API. We're still using the Google API for that, but Drupal is open source. It's good to endorse open source where possible.
And we're talking about the map rendering piece here, not the beginning process of this. So
okay,
so my observations here too are it wasn't, there were some technical problems. So on a project that Nick and I were working on, there were technical issues with the module that we used, and this isn't necessarily a reflection on Drupal, I mean on Google, but we couldn't get, there was CSS issues and all kinds of funny things when we were really trying to customize the map to a certain degree that we did not have that issue with Leaflet. And we're using the IP geolocation module, we could switch between the two, and one was just working seamlessly and one wasn't. Now, that's not necessarily a reflection on Google. It was certainly a reflection on the Google implementation in the Drupal module that we were using. Yeah. And we were able to customize the map and make it work exactly the way we wanted it to and look how we wanted it to, with much easier effort than it was to make the Google one work.
So let me ask this: Do you think it's a usability issue that so many of your users are used to Google Maps and how Google Maps presents itself and operates? Do you think it's a usability issue if you're using a different rendering engine and they're getting basically a different user experience?
I mean, that was a concern that was raised. Personally, I think it looks close enough and works close enough that it's not an issue. If anything, I don't think most people will notice that's not Google, but people will notice that it works nicer.
Okay.
Yeah, John, that was actually one of the concerns with this project, was that because this particular project uses Google Maps in other places, and we decided to just keep those other places using Google Maps because it made sense. It wasn't what we're trying to do on these other pages. I know that's so vague, but there's no reason why you can't use them both. I mean, they're close enough together. You can make the pins look alike, but the better it came down to, really, the better visual and user experience came from Leaflet for us. And so why shouldn't we use it? Because we could always switch back to Google in probably about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and my goal is to convert the other maps to Leaflet as soon as possible.
Right. Yeah, it's So just back to your point, John. This is so we separated the rendering of the map from the actual geolocation data still coming from Google.
So Nick, most of your geolocation data is you're still getting that from Google. You're still going out to Google to get that information.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is just the part.
I don't think Leaflet even provides that service.
No, I think, but you can use open layers.
You can use open layers.
If you want to be completely open source, you can use open layers for grabbing the information, Drupal for storing it, and Leaflet for displaying it.
Okay, that was I guess a mistake on my part. I thought you were using OpenLayer or Leaflet's service to get the map data as well.
Nick, do you have experience grabbing geolocation data from open layers?
I looked at it once briefly. To be honest, Google is extremely easy just to click. I think at the time Leaflet wasn't available as a rendering engine. I think it was also going to be rendering through open layers, and it was a bit more difficult. But it's been quite a while, so I can't really speak to that.
Right.
I think if I had a project that was going to be using a lot of location data, I'd look into it very seriously. Many of my clients really are just using it once or twice a year when they open a new location or something.
They update their own address.
Or maybe they delete the contact page and recreate it.
All right.
You know, and it's the same address, but it's reaching out again. So I just use Google. It's free, takes 2 seconds. But open layers, I would consider for a project internally.
Okay.
Or a project that was using a significant amount of data.
So the moral of the story here is don't be afraid to use stick maps in places where it makes sense, but also don't stick maps where it doesn't make sense. You know, maps are not a great interface for me. I mean, just to find stuff usually, and so I've seen a lot of websites that will do this. Like it'll be a store locator, and you type in your zip code or something, and they give you back a map. That's all they give you. They give you nothing else, which is completely useless to me. I mean, a map should always be supported by a list below it probably that gives you the data that's showing up on the map, which could include the distance from you, like this is 2 miles away, this is 3 miles away, 4 miles away, because I generally find that data much more useful. Just a map by itself then starts to require people to click into a lot of things, and a map on its own is probably not the best way to go.
It also depends on how familiar your users are with the area. I mean, if it's your hometown and you look at it, you can be, oh, okay, I know what that is. You know, that's pretty close to me. That's not. But if you're traveling and you're looking something up, you're going to have no idea how far away something is from you just by looking at the map.
Well, let me ask this question, Nick. Does the maps that you've implemented here stick you as a pin? Do they provide the ability for you to show up on the map so you can see where the locations are in relationship to your current location?
So that's a good question. IP Geolocation does provide that ability by default. They'll throw you right in that you can set it up to center on you. You can set it up to center on everything including you. You can set it to center on everything not including you, depending on the result. So you can really customize that how you want. And IP Geolocation provides that feature.
Great. Hey, John, you have any more questions about this stuff here?
I think it's very interesting. Again, the ease of use that comes along with Google, using Google Maps to render out stuff in your Drupal site is, I kind of outweighs the benefits right this second. That's not to say down the road there wouldn't be a situation where I'm like, oh, I need a really custom map in this.
Yeah, but John, have you, the things that Nick brought up today, have you customized the content when you click on the pin to put, without any issues?
Yeah, so the Google Store Locator actually works off of a JSON view and pulls in all the data that you need inside that pop-up. Yep. So you can customize it to really pop up with anything. You also have the ability to customize pins.
I have to say a couple of things. One, maybe it's just a naming thing, but Google Store Locator feels like it's very restricted to the use case. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't really look at it.
It is. Well, let me answer that. It is restricted to a certain use case of like locating. Okay. Store location, but even with the Gmaps module, I've been able to edit what appears in the pop-up and edit the pin, and even that module I think gives you the ability to have different pins for different pieces of content and whatnot.
No, it doesn't give that ability. You can change a pin by updating the pin in the code base, I think, but it doesn't give the ability to switch pins. As far as ease of use,
so this doesn't need to be the map throwdown either. By
no, and I would just say
I think it does.
It's
interesting to hear our different experiences over time, though.
I would just say one thing though: ease of use. Leaflets, especially for easy things like simple pins and things, Leaflet's just as easy as Google Maps. I mean, they're both. You pretty much just install them, create a view, use that format, and you're done. I mean, that's all there really is to it. For you, for the first time you do it, there's a bit of a learning curve, but once you're familiar with it, there's really no difference between downloading and installing the Google Maps module versus downloading the Leaflet module in the library. It's just I found the difference for my clients I found is the responsiveness. I just feel Leaflet, besides the customizability, I just feel it's much more responsive. And I don't mean responsive in the sense of responsive to design. I mean responsive in, zooming out, clicking on things, seeing stuff. It's just much more smooth than Google Maps. I find it loads a little bit faster as well. Although that could be dependent on, no, it wouldn't be. I find it loads
It could
faster.
be tainted by your Leaflet goggles that you wear. No.
Could be. No, I mean, I have several sites that use
Yeah.
Google Maps as well.
Right. No, I agree. And also, I love the idea of just exploring some of these other options too. I mean, I get that Google is there. I get that it's a staple, but there's nothing wrong with trying something like Leaflet and seeing how it works for you.
Yeah, I mean, at first I was questioning myself. I had somebody recommend Leaflet on another project and didn't really, and at first wasn't very happy with it just because it was like, well, Google works, why would I change?
Right.
But now that I've used it, I'm definitely on the bandwagon.
You're drinking the Kool-Aid, as they
Yeah,
say.
we hadn't noticed. All right, so let's move on to our module of the week, D2D migrate.
So most people that have been working with Drupal for a while have heard of the migrate module. D2D migrate is an extension of the migrate API module that allows for some simple migrations from a Drupal site to another Drupal, well, from any Drupal site to a Drupal 7 site. It has specifics for Drupal 5, Drupal 6, and Drupal 7, but the recipient needs to be Drupal 7. It provides a wizard, a walkthrough wizard, so you can, for example, say you just input the database credentials, and then you just input the database credentials, then it says what roles do you want to import, and you can say, don't import this one has now been renamed to this one, etc. And then it has you do the same for users, has you do the same for taxonomies, and then content types, and then it runs the import. It's pretty straightforward. It works pretty well as long as the starting point and the end point field names are the same. If the field names aren't the same, then it doesn't work. It doesn't give you an interface to say, for example, this field goes to this field. But it's pretty easily extensible. So it's really meant to be, you write a small module yourself that extends those classes and allows you to customize how the content gets imported. Saves a lot of time, and it's quick. I mean, I imported, as a test, I imported about 30,000 nodes and took maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And out of the box, the roles, users, and taxonomies worked. I just needed to customize. I just need to customize how some of the fields are being modified, because I was able to consolidate some stuff. Very useful though.
So it's a good module for converting content.
Yeah, from Drupal
Great.
to Drupal.
All right, let's move on to any announcements or things we want to talk about. I have a couple. First thing is we've recently renamed the New England Drupal Camp, but actually we didn't rename it. We didn't, right? It's still the New England Drupal Camp. We changed the domain name, and I'm not going to go into any long description of that, but we've often referred to it on this show as Nude Camp, and as of the past week, it is now Ned Camp, N-E-D Camp. And if you want to learn more about why we made that name change, go to nedcamp.org and take a look at the blog post that I think it's entitled "What's the Name? What's in a Name?" Part 2. And I'll remind our listeners that that camp is booked October 10th in Providence at Brown University. We are in full steam getting this thing organized. It will be bigger and better than last year, and it's hard to imagine that we could even do that because it was a great weekend. But we're going to do it. So the registration is open. You can register now, and we already have people registering, which is exciting. We have a great keynote speaker, which is Holly Ross, the executive director of the Drupal Association, who'll be joining us on Saturday for the keynote speech. We're excited to have her. And sponsorship is open. It is limited, so if anyone's interested in being a sponsor, you should probably do that sooner than later. We sold out last year. We expect to do the same this year. What am I missing, guys? The last thing I want to say is that session presentations are not open just yet, and you'll just hold off for a future announcement of that. But I imagine it will be in the next 5 to 6 weeks. Did I miss anything? With Nude Camp? So are you guys finding yourself still calling it Nude Camp?
I have to make a concerted effort. We'll put it that way.
It's hard, right?
I'm not finding it difficult. I just have to think about what I'm saying, which, if you know me, it's hard for me to do that sometimes.
Yeah, so it is difficult. Yeah. It's a Nude Camp just rolls off the tongue after we've been saying it for 18 months, switching it to Nude Camp, which is it was a good move to do, but it's just hard to do that. It's funny because I wrote a couple of emails yesterday to people, and I put Nude Camp in the email.
You need to set the autocorrect.
Yeah.
To autocorrect Nude Camp to Nude Camp.
You know what? I didn't actually think of that. It's a great way. I have my little text expander on my Mac. I could do that very easily. That's a good idea, Nick. Also, John, we have a Drupal PVD coming up again, right?
We do. The Providence Drupal Meetup is going to be on the 14th of April, which is a Tuesday, at its new home, which is the Oomph Inc. offices in Providence, Rhode Island. If you have come to the Drupal Meetup in the past, the Oomph Inc. offices are actually about a 5-minute, maybe even a 2 or 3 minute walk from the previous location at Beta Springs. So we're looking forward to that. I can offer food and drink and also some great Drupal lightning talks. So be sure, if you're in the Providence area, to come on down.
Yeah, it's a great time. And it's lightning talks for most people. John tends to take a little bit longer.
I was going to say something, but I decided not to.
I said that for you, Stephen. I figured you were biting your tongue.
John's lightning talk is 35 minutes. Everyone else gets 5. Just kidding, John. John actually did a great lightning quote-unquote talk last month about translation. It was excellent. It was worth the full 35 minutes.
We should mention questions are the reason why.
Yeah, it was.
So.
Yeah,
but it's fun to tease them.
We should definitely mention that because everybody had questions.
Yeah, no, it was really an excellent presentation. Very informative, and we're hoping to get that. You talked a little bit about Lingotech, and we're working with them to get them on the show in the next couple of months. So, just to talk about your experience with them and the solution they provide. So, looking forward to that, and having them on the show was inspired by your talk last week. So.
And that's good because next month I'm going to be doing translation part 2, which will be a 45-minute lightning talk.
Okay.
So.
Okay. We need another word for lightning, I guess. Maybe it should be slow-moving hurricane talk.
Well, lightning is more in terms of the presenter, not so much the length.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, it's not about the speed.
Well,
okay.
At least in my case.
All right. All right, guys. Have we missed anything? John, who are you? Where are you? Tell us it all.
Oh, man, I am John Picozzi, Drupal developer at Oomph Inc. You can find me at John Picozzi on all the social networks, and always on at oomphinc.com.
John, I noticed you're sporting your Boston Red Sox hat today. Are you following spring training?
I am Admittedly, sort of. I'm getting the updates from the games on my phone as they end to see how the socks are faring. They seem to be doing okay. As far as the team and player retention or demotion, however you want to put it, I'm not following that. That's sort of on that level.
Okay, I claim ignorance as well. And we also have Nick Laughlin. Nick, where can we find you?
You can find me online at NixVan pretty much everywhere, NICXVAN. If you have any questions about Leaflet or why I have fallen in love with it, apparently, feel free to tweet me.
Okay, and I'm Stephen Cross, at Stephen Cross with a PH, on Twitter or at parallaxinfotech.com. Go and figure out how to spell that yourself. And hey, guys, we'll talk next week.
See you next week.
See ya.